I'll go ahead and invite you now to join me, if you haven't already, in the book of Genesis. We are looking at a lengthy passage this morning toward the end, or really the middle of Genesis 30. We're going to begin in verse 25, and then we're going to go all the way through the end of Genesis 31 in verse 55. So Genesis 30, 25 through the end of Genesis 31. If you're using the blue ESV Bible and the page number is helpful to you, you can find that on page 24 and 25 and 26. But we'll start on 24, and the title of the sermon is Persona Non Grata. Psalm 7, verses 12 through 16 says this: If a man does not repent, God will whet his sword. He has bent and readied his bow. He has prepared for him his deadly weapons, making his arrows fiery shafts. Behold, the wicked man conceives evil and is pregnant with mischief and gives birth to lies. He makes a pit, digging it out, and falls into the hole that he has made. His mischief returns upon his own head, and on his own skull his violence descends. And we saw perhaps an echo of this in the passage that we considered last week when Jacob comes to Laban, but we see this truth exemplified even further today as the Laban-Jacob cycle of this narrative comes to an end. We saw last week that Laban tricked Jacob into marrying Leah rather than Rachel. And the result, he tricked him to marrying Leah rather than Rachel, and then ended up giving him Rachel to marry as well. And so he ended up with two wives, and then eventually, because of some barrenness, some concubines. And the result of all of this was nothing less than constant conflict, bitter rivalry, you might even call it prostitution, and the abuse of both Leah and Rebekah's maidservants. Now today, roughly 14 years after Jacob has arrived at Haran, he is ready to set out for home. And yet what we find is that Laban has not changed one bit. He is exactly the same man that he was when we met him last week, but even when we met him before in Genesis 24. He remains an avaricious deceiver. And were it not for the intervening of the Lord himself, Jacob would be sent away here with nothing except perhaps the clothes on his back. But what we do have good reason to think here is that this has all been good medicine for Jacob. He came to Haran, a fairly deceitful man, but he will leave, or the question though, as we go through this, is will he leave in the same condition that he arrived? Now he's by no means a perfect man at any point in this narrative, but as we read this passage, it does seem that the Lord is sanctifying him, that the Lord's efforts to transform Jacob, they are proven effectual in his life. And we see also from this passage, the thread, the line that continues through all of it is that God is faithful. He's continuing to fulfill his purposes to Abraham, to Isaac, and now to Jacob, and eventually, ultimately, to the families of the earth. And so I want to read the passage. It's long, but it is good for us to hear from God. So we'll read this passage, outline it, and then we'll begin our work. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go. For you know the service that I have given you." But Laban said to him, "If I found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it." And Jacob said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly. and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also?" He said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later, when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen." Laban said, "Good, let it be as you have said." But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. And Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, "Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he gained all his wealth." And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you." So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where the flock was, and said to them, "I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, 'The spotted shall be your wages,' then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, 'The striped shall be your wages,' then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of the Lord said to me in the dream, 'Jacob.' And I said, 'Here I am.' He said, 'Lift up your eyes and see, all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise and go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred.' Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, 'Is there any portion of inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do.' So Jacob arose and set his sons and wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock and his possessions that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban, the Aramean, by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captors of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me, and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' And now you have gone away because you long greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours, and take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and to Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but he did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." So he searched but did not find the household gods. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? See it here, set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I've been in your house. I served you 14 years for 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock. And you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night." Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these daughters or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." And they took stones and made a heap. And they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galeed. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." Therefore he named it Galeed and Mizpah. For he said, "The Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters or take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." Then Laban said to Jacob, "See this heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. And Laban departed and returned home. We'll have about 400 points to make this morning. Just kidding. We're going to consider this passage according to 3 major scenes. 3 scenes. We see the first in chapter 30, verses 25 to 43, where Jacob prospers despite Laban's schemes. Second, in chapter 31, verses 1 through 21, we see Jacob flee in light of Laban's schemes. And third, in chapter 31, verses 22 through 55, we see Laban pursue, overtake, and a confrontation that results between him and Jacob. So Jacob prospers Jacob flees, Laban pursues, and there's a confrontation at the end of that pursuit. We'll look at these three scenes together. We'll look in the first place at verses 25 to 43 of Genesis 30. We see Jacob. He prospers here. He prospers despite the scheming of Laban. This passage begins roughly 14 years after Jacob has arrived in Haran. He has given service to Laban in exchange for his two daughters, Leah and Rachel. And at the birth of his youngest son, at this point, Joseph, to his beloved wife, Rachel, the one that he loved, he decides, well, now it's time to go home. I've come, I've done my work, I have my family, and it's time to go back. And so he calls upon Laban and asks him to send him away, that he may go to his own home and his own country. Verse 25, that's how he opens this discussion. And Laban says something interesting. He says, well, name your wages. If I've found favor with you, name your wages. But the problem for Jacob here is that he's already gotten his wages. Remember, the 14 years of service that he rendered to Laban was for Leah and for Rachel. And so, according to their previous arrangement, previous agreement, Laban doesn't owe him anything. He's been working as a hired hand. Now, depending on, and if you take later Israelite law into consideration, which this is before these laws are given, so take it for whatever it's worth. But if you think about what later Israelite law does say, we might even fear that he can't even take his wives and children with him. Exodus 21, verses 3 and 4 says that if a slave comes into a new master's house single, he goes out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. Now, he had an option to stay with the family, but if he left alone. And as we see at the end of the passage, when Laban tells him that everything you see, Jacob, is mine, Laban, he seems to, at least in some way, be viewing their relationship primarily, maybe even exclusively, in terms of some kind of master-slave dynamic. Now, Jacob does refer to himself in some way as a slave here a few times, but he seems to be relying more on their family relationship. They're kinsmen to begin with, but they're also now father-in-law and son-in-law. So there seems to be some desire that Laban would treat him a bit differently than he might a common slave. Again, thinking about later Israelite law, in Deuteronomy 15, 12 through 14, we read, if your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years. And in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. And when you let him go free from you, you shall not let him go empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your winepress. Now, we shouldn't think of these laws as in any kind of full operation at this time, or obviously they weren't given yet. Unlikely that these men necessarily even had these thoughts in their heads at all. But thinking about the law in Torah later, there is this interesting dynamic between Laban and Jacob. Even granting the master-slave dynamic between them, that he sold himself into service to Laban in exchange for 2 wives, their family relationship, the dynamic between them as kinsmen before or father-in-law and son-in-law here, seemed to mean nothing to Laban. Name your wages. What do I owe you? You've been here 14 years. What do I owe you? According to later Israelite law, he would have been obligated to have given Jacob this golden handshake and send him on his way with a liberal blessing. But the truth is, Laban, he's not eager for Jacob to leave. I've been mightily blessed because of you, man. I don't want you to leave. It's not because he loves him or because he loves his daughters or he loves his grandchildren. He's prospered quite a bit from Jacob. And so he says, if you want to take something with you, what are you willing to do for it? And Jacob appeals in these opening verses here to Laban's own admission that God had blessed him because of Jacob. You've gotten a lot because of me. And then he even asks, is it not right that I provide for my own family? Shouldn't Laban desire to see his daughters and his grandchildren cared for? Is he really prepared to send this man away with nothing to provide for his family? Well, so and at this question, when shall I provide for my own household? Laban responds, he says, well, what shall I give you? But Jacob knows Laban. He knows him better than we do. And so perhaps realizing Laban isn't going to give Jacob anything for free, Jacob decides some kind of deal needs to be struck. After all, it won't do him very well to leave with literally just his wives and children and no way to care for them. And so he offers, look, man, don't give me anything. I will pasture your flocks again if you let me take as my wages the speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb and the spotted and speckled among the goats. In other words, he's the less likely to be found among the livestock. The rarer ones that you're unlikely to get, the monocolored, the single-colored animals that are much more likely to result from this herd and our general expectations. You can have those. I'll take the small amount of the ones that are speckled and spotted. And so he puts himself at a pretty significant disadvantage here. He gives Laban a deal that would be hard to refuse. Of course, Laban seizes upon the opportunity, but as we've seen, Laban, he's a greedy and a dishonest man. He immediately sets out to make Jacob's situation go from what you might call bad to worse. He takes the few multicolored animals that were in the flock and he drives them a 3 days' journey from there, leaving Jacob with only monocolored sheep, lambs, and goats. And then we get one of the strangest episodes in the Bible. In verses 37 to 43. There are, basically, you summarize it with like two strategic moves, I guess, that Jacob makes here concerning the breeding of this flock. One, he employs some strategy regarding sticks and what the flock was looking at when they were breeding to produce multicolored animals. And second, he ensures that the strongest of the flock were the ones that reproduced along these multicolored lines. And like I said last week, with Jacob's marriage to Leah, I've got just so many questions. But like last week, the Bible just doesn't really seem to care about my questions. Now, I do want to come back in the next scene and look at Jacob's own words to try to assess what it is that he's doing here. But for now, I just want to point out the result. The result of these strategies, we see in verse 43, the man increased greatly. He had large flocks, female servants, male servants, camels, and donkeys. Despite Laban's scheming, which we'll see in even greater detail later, Jacob prospers here. He greatly increased. That word increase there is the same word that God used in Genesis 28 when he told Jacob, you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And so we see here, at least implied, and we get it stated explicitly in a moment, God is keeping his promises. He's keeping his promise to Jacob, despite the adversity that he faces in his father-in-law. So that's the first scene. Jacob prospers. But beginning then in verse 1 of chapter 31, Jacob flees. Jacob's prosperity at Laban's expense went over like a lead balloon with Laban and with the rest of Laban's family, it seems. He's become persona non grata. He's an unwelcome person. Jacob hears that Laban's sons are none too pleased at Jacob's wealth. He's become wealthy at Dad's expense. He observes from Laban himself that Laban doesn't regard me as he once did. Now, we're not told exactly what he thought at this point. We can guess because he already wanted to go home. But the Lord comes here now and directly intervenes, and he tells him, Jacob, go home. Verse 3. So he calls a family meeting. He tells Rachel and Leah his plans. And his speech to them unfolds along two basic lines. First, he summarizes their current situation. Things aren't great. But they could be much worse. And it's here in his speech to his wives that I want to make some kind of an attempt at assessing what Jacob was doing in breeding the flock. There are a variety of interpretations people have given to this, obviously. Some have viewed Jacob's actions quite negatively. He's back to his old ways. He's conniving. Maybe it's like Scripture is condoning some kind of weird, ancient shepherding folklore and weird shepherding practices. Others have seen that his setting forth of these sticks as explicit proof of his faith in God. Since I guess it was such a crazy thing to do. Others have made attempts to wrestle with all kinds of biological issues to prove that it had something to do with the drinking water, and it's all over the place. The truth is, the text just doesn't tell us explicitly what's going on here, but we can make some important and helpful inferences. First thing we can see here is that there is a difference in character between the two men. Jacob makes a modest and honest proposal. In neither the narrative account of or in Jacob's retelling of it, do we have any reason to suspect that he's actually doing something specifically underhanded or deceitful. He doesn't trick Laban. He doesn't actually do anything dishonest. He keeps to the terms of the agreement that had been freely negotiated between them. Jacob is employing some kind of means here, odd though they may seem to be, in verses 37 to 43. But when he tells this narrative to his wives, what does he tell them? He is clear that his success must be attributed where? To God. God is the one who has protected him from the harm Laban intended against him. So whatever he was doing with the sticks, it's clear, as he says to his wives, it was God who made the situation advantageous for him. He put himself at a fairly strong disadvantage and had to rely upon the Lord who had promised to deliver him. Laban, however, attempts to cheat Jacob immediately. He shows himself once more to be a dishonest, a reprehensible individual. In Jacob's accounting of it to his wives, it seems that during those intervening years that the deal was struck, Laban sought to change the terms of the agreement on numerous occasions. Yet each time, the Lord saw to it that Jacob prospered still. Now you might think, well, he's just telling this story to his wives so they will agree with him to flee. But he makes this charge directly to Laban later on. And Laban has no rebuttal. So it seems reasonable to think that he's telling the truth. It fits with Laban's character, certainly. And so what we see here is that despite Laban's cunning, his craftiness, his cheating, his wealth is transferred to his nephew, his son-in-law, bondservant. Ultimately, by God's doing. Despite the way that Laban tried to make it advantageous for himself, it all backfires. As we saw in Psalm 7, the wicked has dug a pit and he's fallen into it. Now, in the second part of his speech, Jacob informs his wives that God spoke to him, referencing Bethel. Said he called upon me to return home. The precise wording of this call alludes to the wording of God's call to Abraham, when he tells Jacob, now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred. Abraham, in his call in Genesis 12, he was setting out for a new land. Jacob is returning to an old land, just so happens to be the same one to which Abraham went. And then Leah and Rachel, they respond, and based on chapter 30, it seems like they've not really been able to agree on much up to this point. But they don't seem to have any problem agreeing now. Whatever specific things they have in mind regarding the ways their father has devoured their wealth, we probably can't be sure, but the point is clear. They feel like strangers in their home. And they see that the wealth that God has taken from Laban and given to Jacob, they see that as though it should have been theirs in the first place, and it belongs to them now. And so they agree to go. So while Laban's away shearing sheep, Jacob packs up his family, all their stuff, and they take off. The flight from Canaan was quick and speedy. Didn't take a lot. He didn't have much with him. The flight back to Canaan has a lot more stuff. The text tells us that he tricked or stole the heart of Laban by not telling him that he was going. So the deceiver of the deceiver is tricked and deceived. We're told also that Rachel stole the household gods, the teraphim, from Laban's home. These household gods may have been the means by which he sought to practice divination. They may have been for the sake of fertility, inheritance rights, representation of ancestors. There's lots of options. It's not clear. It's also not exactly clear why she took them. Was she taking them in spite of Laban? Did she take them as idols for herself? Did she take them because she planned to sell them later? We don't know. We do know that later in Genesis 35, Jacob's family has been apparently pretty openly traveling with idols. But she is clearly upset with her father. She pays zero respect to these idols. So it seems most likely that some kind of retribution against Laban. And so Jacob flees. There's two scenes. Jacob prospers despite Laban's schemes, and then he flees in light of Laban's schemes. But then in 22, to the end of the chapter, we see a third scene unfold. A hot pursuit and a confrontation, and then, surprisingly, of all things, peace-ish. 3 days after they left, Laban learns that they had gone. He pursues them for 7 days. He watches them from afar. The Lord comes to Laban in a dream, and he warns him, be careful, take heed, do not say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Despite this warning, Laban engages in one of the longest and fiercest tirades in the whole book of Genesis. He moves from feigned indignation to rank hypocrisy to wrathful denunciation to half-hearted sympathy, and he closes with a perplexed reproach. His complaint here, though, seems pretty unbelievable. He wanted to send them away with mirth and songs, tambourine and lyre. He wanted to throw a big party so he could kiss his sons and daughters farewell. When Jacob sought to leave 6 years ago, Laban, he said he was too valuable to lose. He tried to convince him to stay. Stay for another 6 years, he did. And even now, when he comes to him, he's not hurt primarily. He's inclined to hurt Jacob. But God had stayed his hand. In verse 30, he comes close to sympathizing with Jacob, Now you have gone away because you long greatly for your father's house. But then he can't bring himself to actually imagine what Jacob was thinking, and so he abruptly shifts back to his accusations. Why did you steal my gods? Well, Jacob answers the first question, why did I flee? I was concerned that you would take your daughters by force, that you wouldn't let them leave with me. And then he says, quite overconfident of his party's innocence, he pronounces the death penalty on anyone with whom the teraphim were found. And so the tents are searched one by one. When Rachel's tent is searched, she mentions she can't rise because the way of women is upon her. Now, it's not clear if she's lying about this or if she's using the truth as a convenient excuse not to get up. But either way, this is a polemic against false gods and idols. These gods of Laban's, they could be stolen, they could be carried away in a sack, they could be sat on, they could, forgive the language, become sanitary towels. Laban's gods here are mocked as he himself, despite his rage, is restrained by the fear of Isaac. Laban's idols could do nothing for him. Jacob's God defended him the whole time. Failing to find his precious idols, Laban is now somewhat in a very weird position. He's sort of at Jacob's mercy, and Jacob lets him have it. He gets angry. He berates Laban after 20 years of abuse. What's my offense, man? What's my sin? I haven't taken anything from you. Not only do I not have those household gods, so he thought, but I don't have anything that belongs to you. Jacob points out that he went out of his way to be an exceptionally good herdsman for Laban. It was generally not required at the time for the herdsman to bear the losses himself, especially if they occurred at night. But Jacob did. It was required of him. And he willingly put up with it. The conniver has learned some honest ways, it seems. He's gone above and beyond what was expected of him. Jacob's been honest. Laban hasn't. Laban has changed his wages again and again. If God had not been with Jacob, Laban would be sending him away empty-handed or worse. Truth is, especially at this point, there'd probably be bloodshed today. But God saw Jacob's affliction. He saw the labor of his hands, and he rebuked Laban. Now, Laban's response to Jacob's berating is a rather lame but telling response. He says, the daughters and the children are mine. Everything you see is mine. And yet, Mr. Generous, he only cares that they're taken care of. And so he seeks to make a covenant with Jacob. Now, in short, Laban is a dishonest and deceitful man. And so not surprisingly, he doesn't trust anybody. He says, when I can't keep my eyes on you, let's have this pillar set up here as a reminder that God is watching. Laban's polytheism comes out as well. He uses a plural verb for the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, to judge between them. And then he ironically commands Jacob, don't take any more wives besides these two. And so Jacob, kind of interestingly, he swears, he makes this covenant. He swears by the one God, the fear of his father Isaac. He makes a sacrifice, surely on his own, not with Laban as a particular part of this. They have a couple of meals together. He spends the night. In the morning, Laban kisses his children, his grandchildren, and he heads for home. So long, Laban. I want to make a few observations by way of application as we close here. The first thing is we need to trust God and his promises. We need to remember that God sees your affliction, beloved. God promised Jacob that he would take care of him, and he did. Jacob was at Laban's mercy for 2 decades. And if it were up to Laban, Jacob would probably be dead. But God had protected him. He had provided for him. He had blessed him. Believer, do you trust God's promises? Do you know that God will never leave you nor forsake you? Sinner though you are, God is working in you, and He will not abandon you. You are never, Christian, you are never persona non grata in God's sight. In fact, it was precisely because Jesus became so, as it were, that you won't ever be. Isaiah 53, He was pierced for our transgressions, He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon Him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with His wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on Him the iniquity of us all. And so the first thing we have to do from a passage like this is to believe God, to trust Him. But the second thing, and I have a few fairly brief points under this, and then we'll be done. It's obey God's commands. I'll highlight 5 things here. The first, be a lover of the truth. Lying and deceit are forbidden by the 9th commandment, and loving and telling the truth are commanded by it. God judges dishonest Laban, whose wealth is transferred to Jacob. Plus, his children leave with their children, arguably never to see him again. We certainly never hear from him again. He loses out on a good worker. It's true that Jacob was never meant to stay in Haran forever, but the manner in which he left, the manner in which he was parted from Laban, none of it needed to be so adversarial, so unfortunate for Laban. He could have blessed Jacob and received blessing in return, but he didn't. He tricked and deceived him countless times. So love the truth. Second, be humble and diligent in your labors and generous with your wealth. The 8th commandment forbids theft and it enjoins hard work and generosity. Jacob was a hard and an honest worker for Laban. He took the losses himself. And he gave all the credit to the Lord. And he confessed that God had cared for him. Are we honest and hard workers? Do we recognize that our advantage comes not from our own ingenuity, but from God? We see Jacob not only benefited his master, Laban, for 14 years, but he wanted to provide for his people. He wanted to be a faithful head of his household. He worked hard for his wages that he might provide for his family and bless his own. Husbands, fathers, in particular, take a note out of Jacob's playbook here. Are you eager, as he was, to provide for your household? Paul tells us that a man who doesn't do so denies the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So may we, like Jacob, be hard workers, be generous. Or if you are an employer who has employees, are you generous and kind to your employees? Or do you find yourself tempted to be like Laban? Third, we need to forsake petty retribution. Rachel is angry at her father, and so she steals his household gods. And it's only through deception or the convenience of menstruation that she's saved. Yet she does die not too long after this exchange in Genesis 35. God condemns stealing in the 8th commandment. We said He commands honoring father and mother in the 5th. Rachel. Rachel's pettiness breaks both of these. Now, she clearly doesn't venerate these idols. And so I'm not inclined to think that she steals them for herself. But if she does steal them for herself, for worship, for idolatry, well, she's breaking the 1st and 2nd commandment. I'm not saying she doesn't have a right to be displeased with the way her father has treated her. Real justice is a good thing and a blessing. But we need to forsake petty retribution. Because it ends up putting Jacob in a pretty ironic spot, an uncomfortable and awkward spot. It may have cost Rachel her life, or it nearly did at the very least. And lastly, live at peace whenever possible. The compromise between Jacob and Laban isn't exactly an ideal conclusion, but it's better than bloodshed and further deceit. So brothers and sisters, let's live at peace with one another. Paul commands us, as much as depends on you, live at peace with all men. As Christians, we must live peaceably with one another. We've been bought by the blood of Jesus, so there is no excuse for hostility, vitriol, and discord among us. And insofar as it is possible, even with unbelievers, people of the world, we want to be committed to peace with them as well. Of course, there are times when peace is simply not possible. Even among brothers, there are times when it is best to go our separate ways. We can think of Paul and Barnabas. But may we commit ourselves to peace, asking the Lord for help, trusting Him, and obeying His word.